You are 32 years old, halfway through a routine credit risk meeting, when the first war you ever finance begins with a phone call you almost ignore. At that moment, your life is simple in the way banking life often is. You sit in a glass conference room on the 21st floor of a mid-tier international bank that specializes in sovereign lending. Your job is technical, cautious, quiet. You run numbers that decide whether governments receive credit lines or polite refusals. You move digits across spreadsheets worth billions, yet your personal world remains small. Regulatory memos, interest curves, committee votes, and cautious language that never sounds like power. Your phone vibrates twice against the table. Unknown number. You silence it and keep speaking. 2 minutes later, it rings again. You apologize to the committee chair, step outside, and answer. The voice on the other end does not introduce itself. It simply says your name, your department, and the exact sovereign bond model you finished revising last night at 1:14 a.m. Then it tells you something impossible. A country you just declined will go to war in 72 hours. You assume it's a joke or a delusion. Governments do not schedule wars through mid-level bankers. You tell the caller that intelligence speculation is not relevant to credit committee procedures. The voice continues anyway. If the war begins without financing, the regime collapses. If it collapses, 2 nuclear arsenals fall into contested control. Your model just helped trigger that chain reaction. You wait for the punchline that never arrives. The caller asks a simple question. What interest rate would keep them solvent for 90 days of combat operations? You should hang up. You know that immediately. Instead, you answer. You say the number. It's reflex, a technical response to a theoretical scenario. But the voice thanks you as if you just authorized something real. The call ends. You return to the conference room and finish the meeting. The committee votes to maintain the credit denial. The official reasoning is currency instability, corruption indicators, and excessive military expenditure. Everyone congratulates themselves on responsible banking. 3 days later, the war begins exactly as predicted. You watch the news like everyone else. Missile strikes, border clashes, emergency sessions at the United Nations. Analysts speculate about the country's finances. Military mobilization costs billions per week. No major bank extends credit. Their bonds collapse. Then something strange happens. Despite the financial isolation, the war continues. Fuel shipments keep arriving. Ammunition contracts keep getting paid. Military payroll continues without interruption. The regime somehow finds money. 2 weeks later, the unknown number calls again. You calculated the 90-day survival rate correctly, the voice says. Now we need a restructuring model. You should report the call to compliance. You should alert regulators. Instead, you ask the question that matters. Who funded them? There is a pause. Then the voice answers. You did. You laugh. It sounds thin even to yourself. But the caller explains. Not directly. Never directly. They talk about secondary credit markets, obscure investment vehicles, commodity-backed swaps routed through private clearinghouses in 3 jurisdictions that do not coordinate oversight. They describe a financial structure built from fragments of your own analysis, pieces of models you published internally, risk calculations you assumed nobody outside the bank would ever read. Someone used your math. They used it to raise $20 billion in 48 hours, enough to start a war. You tell them that's impossible. The voice replies calmly, it already happened. Now the question is whether you want control of it. That sentence changes your life. You spend the next week trying to ignore it, but the calls continue. Always short, always precise. Each one referencing financial moves that appear in the news days later. Oil futures shifting, emergency bond purchases, gold reserves quietly transferred between central banks. Someone is running a shadow financial operation large enough to sustain war economies, and they want you involved. Eventually, curiosity defeats caution. You agree to meet. The meeting happens in a private office owned by a consulting firm that technically does not exist in any corporate registry you can access. The man waiting for you is older than you expected, maybe 60, maybe older, with the relaxed posture of someone who never rushes because everything important already happens on his schedule. He does not introduce himself. He already knows you, your education, your models, your career trajectory, the exact weaknesses in your professional ambitions. You understand sovereign debt better than anyone your age, he says. You say nothing. He slides a tablet across the table. On the screen is a financial map that makes your stomach tighten. Lines connect governments, arms manufacturers, resource companies, shell corporations, and private lenders across half the planet. Money flows through them in patterns you recognize immediately. War financing. Not one war, all of them. You're looking at the real system.
the man says. You study the map. The scale is impossible. Dozens of conflicts, insurgencies, military buildups, covert operations, all tied together by financial instruments that hide their purpose inside legitimate markets. The man watches you understand. Wars don't run on ideology, he says quietly. They run on liquidity. You ask the obvious question, why show me this? He answers with another question. How many sovereign credit models have you built? You tell him. How many wars do you think your models already influence? You hesitate, because you know the answer. More than you ever intended. He leans back. Every conflict eventually runs out of money, he says. When that happens, the side that finds financing survives. You stare at the map. You finance them. We finance everyone, he replies. The sentence should horrify you. Instead, it fascinates you, because you realize something profound in that moment. The true power behind war isn't generals or presidents. It's whoever controls the cash flow that keeps armies moving, and the man across the table is offering you that control. He explains the structure slowly. Not a conspiracy, a market.
Wars create demand. Weapons, logistics, reconstruction, intelligence services, security contractors. Demand attracts capital. Governments cannot publicly finance many of these operations. Political risk, sanctions, public scrutiny. So private capital fills the gap through complex instruments, offshore loans, commodity futures tied to resource concessions, infrastructure bonds backed by future reconstruction projects. Your job would be simple. You would build the financial architecture that keeps conflicts solvent. You would determine how long wars last. You sit there for a long time without speaking, because you understand the moral weight instantly. This isn't financing development projects. This is financing violence. But the man offers one final argument. If you don't build the system, he says, someone else will. That argument has destroyed more moral resistance than any other. You say yes, and that's how you become the banker who funds wars. At first, the work feels technical again, almost normal. You analyze supply chains instead of credit risk. How many artillery shells an army can fire before needing new contracts. How long fuel reserves last under sustained air campaigns. How quickly sanctions choke off traditional financing. Your spreadsheets become battle timelines. Your interest rate calculations become survival curves for governments. The first deal you structure is small by the standards you will later command, only $2 billion. It flows through 3 hedge funds, 2 mining companies, and a shipping consortium that publicly believes it's investing in infrastructure development. The money arrives exactly when the government's war budget collapses. Their offensive continues. You watch the news coverage. No one mentions you. No one ever will. That anonymity becomes your shield. Months turn into years. Your role expands quickly because your models work. You understand something most financiers ignore. Wars are not random. They follow patterns of expenditure, exhaustion, and escalation that can be predicted with cold mathematical precision. You learn how to estimate the cost of an insurgency, how to price the survival of a dictatorship, how to calculate the economic breaking point of a democracy during prolonged conflict. And once you know those numbers, you know where to apply money to change the outcome. Sometimes the goal is extension. A government needs 6 more months to crush a rebellion. You design the financing. Sometimes the goal is stalemate. 2 sides must keep fighting long enough for diplomatic leverage to emerge. You fund both. That part disturbs you at first, but the man who recruited you explains the logic. Wars end faster when both sides remain solvent, he says. You're not sure you believe him, but the system runs on that philosophy. Your network grows quietly. Investment funds that specialize in high-risk sovereign opportunities, private military contractors whose payroll depends on your credit lines, commodity traders who hedge oil fields that may change hands during offensives. Everyone knows part of the truth. Only you see the whole picture. 5 years after that first meeting, you control more war financing than any institution in history. You never appear in reports, you never attend political summits, but your phone contains direct contact lines to ministers of defense, intelligence directors, and billionaires who profit from instability. They call you when budgets collapse. They call you when offensives stall. They call you when they need money faster than governments can admit they need it. And you decide. You begin to understand something unsettling. War strategy is less important than cash flow timing. An army can win a battle and still lose the war if payroll fails the following month. A rebellion can survive indefinitely if someone keeps paying for ammunition. You become the invisible variable that decides which side survives the winter. With that power comes constant tension, because every decision carries consequences measured in lives. You remember the first time a war ends because you cut financing. It happens after 9 years of conflict in a mountainous region that analysts call unwinnable. Both sides have funding sources. Both sides refuse negotiations. Casualties climb. Your network finances logistics for both governments indirectly through energy infrastructure loans. One day you decide to test something. You quietly block the renewal of a key credit facility. Fuel deliveries stop. Within 6 weeks, both armies run out of operational capacity. Peace talks begin. You should feel proud. Instead, you feel something heavier because you realize you could have ended the war years earlier or prolonged it indefinitely. That realization changes how you see every conflict afterward. Years pass. Your influence spreads across continents. Wars begin and end while you sit in quiet offices reviewing spreadsheets. But power attracts enemies. The first threat arrives from a government that realizes your network financed their opponent, not publicly, privately. An intelligence officer contacts you through a channel you recognize as hostile. He knows pieces of your operation, not enough to destroy you, enough to be dangerous. He offers a deal. Exclusive financing access in exchange for protection. You refuse. Your strength depends on neutrality. If you become loyal to one regime, the rest of the world closes its doors. The officer warns you. You cannot stay invisible forever. You already know that, but you also know something he does not. Your system is too distributed to shut down easily. Money flows through hundreds of entities, each legally separate, each convinced it participates in normal financial activity. Even you cannot fully stop it anymore. The system feeds itself. Another decade passes. You grow older. Your reputation spreads through whispers among the global elite. Some call you a stabilizer. Others call you a war profiteer. Most call you when they need liquidity. You watch governments rise and collapse based on financial endurance. You watch rebel leaders become presidents after surviving long enough to negotiate, and you know which loans made those outcomes possible. Sometimes you try to impose rules. You refuse deals that would escalate conflicts into nuclear risk. You refuse financing when civilian casualties cross certain thresholds. Your network complains, but usually adapts. You tell yourself those decisions make the system less monstrous, but the truth remains uncomfortable. Every war that continues past its natural exhaustion often continues because you found a way to keep it solvent. The most dangerous moment of your career arrives 15 years after that first phone call. 3 regional conflicts merge into one massive geopolitical confrontation. Major powers begin funding proxy forces. Sanctions spread across half the world's financial institutions. Traditional war financing collapses, and suddenly every side turns to the only network still capable of moving money, yours. Your phone rings constantly. Governments demand credit lines worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Arms manufacturers request advance payments for production surges. Energy companies offer resource concessions in exchange for financing. The scale overwhelms even your system. You realize something terrifying. If you choose one side, the balance of global power shifts permanently. If you choose both sides, the war may last decades. If you choose neither, the financial shock could collapse multiple economies. You spend weeks analyzing the numbers, war budgets, supply chain capacity, debt sustainability curves. Every model points to the same conclusion. The world is about to enter the most expensive conflict in modern history, and everyone expects you to pay for it. One night, you sit alone reviewing projections that estimate casualties not in thousands, but millions. You remember the conference room where this all started, back when you believed banking was neutral. You know now that finance is never neutral. Money always chooses sides, even when it pretends not to.
You make a decision that changes everything. Instead of funding the war fully, you ration liquidity, enough financing to prevent collapse, not enough to enable decisive victory. The conflict drags into stalemate within a year. Peace negotiations begin under economic pressure. Your network earns enormous profits during the process, but the war ends sooner than your projections predicted. Some people will call that manipulation. Others will call it stability. You're not sure which label is correct. Now you are older. Your network spans thousands of financial channels across the globe. Young analysts study your models without realizing their purpose. Politicians denounce war profiteering while quietly relying on the credit lines you provide. You still receive calls from unknown numbers, sometimes from generals, sometimes from rebels, sometimes from people who believe they can threaten you. You listen to them all, because information is currency, and in your world, currency decides survival. Late at night, you sometimes think about the first war you financed, the one that started with a phone call you almost ignored. You wonder how many lives changed because you answered, but the questions never end there, because every new conflict begins the same way. Someone runs out of money, someone calls you, and you decide whether the war continues tomorrow. Right now, your phone sits on the desk in front of you. It vibrates again. Another unknown number. You already know what the voice on the other end will ask, how much financing it takes to keep the war alive, and whether you're willing to provide it. You pick up the phone, because the truth you learned long ago still holds. Wars run on liquidity, and you are the banker who controls it.